The Nashville Bar Association is doing their legal history project and oral interviews of lawyers that have had distinguished and interesting careers. And today is June 6th of 2016, and I get to interview Mr. Bart Durham, and I'm his son Blair. I'm extremely privileged and honored to be able to ask him some questions and talk about his great career. And Dad, will you tell the Legal History Project your full name and where you were born?
Bart Durham, Bartlett Chesterfield, Durham III,
Right.
Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay. And who were your parents? And
Mr. and Mrs. Bartlett Chesterfield, Durham Jr.
okay. And a little bit about their background.
My father was a lawyer. My grandfather was a lawyer. They were West Tennessee. My dad was born in Durhamville, Tennessee, which is my great-grandfather was from Durhamville. He was a farmer that moved to Durhamville, and that was the family home. And I was born in Memphis and have lived in Ripley all my life up until school.
And what did your dad, what were his business interests and political and civic interests?
Well, you probably don't even know this, Blair, but my dad was orphaned, and they lived in Vicksburg, Mississippi. And the floods came, and the levees broke, and so they kept moving. My dad was 16 or 15 when he enrolled in the University of Alabama, and he went there, and in 1918 he left Alabama to go in the Army. And when he got out of the Army, he read law in Judge John Gray's office in Brownsville, Tennessee. And in those days, the judges just certified you when you were ready to practice. So he started practicing law in 1918 in Ripley, Tennessee. After a while, he worked hard, and I guess he was respected. He was elected mayor of the town because he was back from the Army and a young lawyer, small town, farming town. And then he started the bank. He was with some people who started the Bank of Ripley. And also he was the co-publisher of the Lauderdale County Enterprise. It was a weekly paper. Dad was a writer. He loved Shakespeare, and he loved that sort of thing. And he became the sports stringer for the Memphis Commercial Appeal. The stringer is somebody in every little town when there's a football or basketball game or some event like that. They write it up and telegraph it to the Memphis paper, and it comes out the next morning. So Dad did that. He loved to write editorials. He wrote editorials for the Lauderdale County Enterprise that were probably very liberal then, but would be middle of the road today.
Wow. And what was your childhood like? Where did you grow up? And
I grew up in Ripley, and childhood was idyllic. You know, it was a small town. Everybody knew everybody. And there were no drama stories or episodes of craziness. It was just Mayberry, USA.
And what did you like to do as a kid?
Sports. That's the only thing we had was sports and reading. No television, very little radio, as I recall.
What was was there a racial divide back in those days in West Tennessee?
Yeah, the whites and the blacks had different water fountains. Everything was separate, different schools. I tell this story, I don't know how accurate it is, but it may be. I never met a black person who could read or write until I was 18 or 19 years old.
Wow. And where did you go to school?
Ripley Grammar School, Ripley High School. And my junior year, I went off to boarding school in Miami at Ransom School in Miami, Florida.
And as a young teenager, young adult, did you have any particular passions or hobbies?
Yeah, chasing girls would be one. Sports, football, basketball, baseball, tennis.
Did you fly as a young man?
No.
No. And where did you go to college?
Florida State.
All right. How did you pick Florida State?
Because of the weather. It had been an all-girls school, and it changed over to a boys' school the year before I started, and it was a good school. So.
Yeah. Any influential people that you met there? Anything that stands out?
A lot of professors. I've started out in, I don't even know which subject, but my economics professor was so good that I switched over and majored in economics just because I liked his lectures and he inspired me. My English professor, Dr. Rogers, was great, and I took a lot of English courses.
And then what about law school? How did you end up with that as a...
I left, I graduated in Florida State in the fall, and I couldn't get into University of Florida until the winter. They were on the semester system. So I went to Nashville. My dad was in the legislature, and I told him what I wanted to do, go to start in law school. He said, well, University of Tennessee. In those days, the presidents of these colleges were lobbyists. That was their main job, is to get funding for their school. So Dad called Dr. Bowling, who was the president of the University of Tennessee. They had breakfast every morning with a group of them, and he said, my son would like to go to law school. He said, well, we start classes in a week. So I got on in my car and drove over to law school, and I started. I didn't take the LSAT or any of the traditional admissions. I just was admitted, which wasn't unusual. Anybody could be admitted to college or law school, maybe even medical school if you had if you'd had chemistry and the right courses. So I started law school in February, in the middle of the year, rather than wait another whole year.
What year are we talking about there?
1957 or 58.
Okay. And was it before law school or after that you were in the military?
I was in law school 2 years. I hated UT. Everybody in law school hated the law school. They liked it, they respected it, they liked the teachers, but it was just no fun. So, and I was the youngest person in the University of Tennessee Law School. There were mostly many ex-soldiers on the GI Bill, and I was 19 or 20 years old in law school. And I didn't do well. I made an A in the toughest course in law school, which was domestic relations, taught by Dr. Martin Feerick. And Dr. Feerick, everybody was afraid of him. And he would go through the courses and ask, the seniors would wait till their last year to take his course. And they would, and he'd say, now, Mr. So-and-so, what's the answer to that? And no matter what they answered, I later figured out, he'd say, he would look at them with contempt, that you really don't know what you're talking about. He'd say, Durham, tell them the answer. And I was a young freshman, no matter what I said. So I made an A in that course, which was the highlight of my academic career, probably. And because I studied it, I was scared to go into class because I knew what was. So, and I made an F in one course. I forget what it was, constitutional law or something like that.
Yeah.
Dr. Ovid, and a lot of people watching this will remember those professors. And so I struggled with just barely a C average. After 2 years, I went in the Army, thinking I was ready for a change.
Was Tennessee Law School one of those look to your left, look to your right type of
Absolutely,
schools?
absolutely. And they told us that. It's not just an urban legend. They said that. And believe it or not, it was true. We started out with it because anybody could get in. It was just only took 3 years of college to get in law school. I had a college degree, but many of them just had 3 years. It was like a fourth year of college. So many of them didn't know if they wanted to be a lawyer or not.
And back in those days, was law school 3 years?
Yes, it was the same as it was today.
And so 2 years and you joined the Army. What was that like?
I did boot camp at Fort Knox, and at that time the Korean War was going on. So they were drafting people, and you could have your choice if you enlisted of going to Europe or Asia. So I took Europe, and I served in Germany.
Any fun memories about your time in Germany?
Well, because I had been in law school, and I got assigned to the United States Army headquarters in Heidelberg, Germany, and I worked in the office. It was head of the Army, so the chief of staff and the commander-in-chief of the European Army. They were all there, and so I worked with a lot of generals, and I was a clerk typist in one of the offices there.
Did they ever let you do anything fun or any
I
interesting
got to call
experience?
alerts sometimes.
What does that mean?
Well, once, infrequently, it was to be a surprise alert. There were like maybe 100,000 troops in Germany and Europe, and you didn't never know when the alert was going to be. It meant everybody had to run, jump in trucks. They all had jobs to do. So the officer of the day would come in, and if I was working that night, say, Durham, so you want to call the alert tonight? Yes, sir. So 2 o'clock in the morning, I'd say, sir, how about the alert? In a few minutes, every soldier in Europe would have to get out of bed because of me.
What are there any, at that point, you'd completed 2 years of law school, and you were in the Army for 2 years?
Yeah.
And then what about when you got out?
When I got back out, I went to Memphis. I had a friend in Memphis, and he said I was going back to finish up my 3rd year, and once again I'd have to wait 6 months for the semester or the term to start. And he said, why don't you come down and go to law school in Memphis and at the night law school. And so I went and saw Mr. Bierman, and his son Joe Bierman is a prominent attorney in Memphis, but Mr. Bierman is a wonderful man. He loved me, and we talked. He said, son, just come on here and go 2 nights a week, and in a year you'll be graduated. You won't have to go back to Knoxville where you don't know anybody. So that's what I did, and I went, graduated there.
And in those days, did you have to take a bar exam after?
Oh,
you?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
I've always wondered if you passed the bar. So.
Well, I had a kidney stone, and I started, after I graduated from law school, I had this kidney stone, and I went to class one meeting, and it turned out that I went in the hospital with a kidney stone the next day. So the bar exam was coming up, and my dad said, son, are you going to take the bar exam? No, I think I'll wait. He said, well, you got nothing to lose. Go ahead and try it. So I took the bar exam without hardly studying for it all, and I looked up and passed it. So that was my experience with the bar exam.
And then what?
Then I went and practiced with my dad in Ripley. My dad was a lawyer, and I was with him a year. He passed away after a year.
I remember you telling a story I think would be interesting about your dad trying a case of a Marine who had come back from war.
Oh yeah, those are the Yoakum brothers.
Yeah.
At the end of World War II, 2 Yoakum brothers killed the 2 Henderson brothers. The Hendersons were, Jap Henderson was one of the wealthiest men in the county, and in Ripley down on the Mississippi River is something called the Bottom, which is very rich farmland from all the flooding and then the receding. It was sort of like the Nile in Egypt, and the land was really expensive, and the Hendersons ruled it. The police were afraid, the sheriffs were afraid to go down there. Mr. Henderson was the law. So the Yoakum brothers got out of the Marine Corps, and there was an altercation, and the Yoakums went back and got their guns and came back down to the Bottom, and there was a shootout, and both the Henderson boys were killed. So they tried the 2 Yoakum brothers for murder in Ripley, and it's right after the war, and the emotions were still patriotism, emotions were high. So I was a little kid. I was born in '35. I'd been 8 or 10 years old. Mm. But I can remember the courthouse with no air conditioning, and it was a lawn, and the people were all out on the lawn. The courtroom was filled with several hundred people, and it was a big deal of excitement. And that was the entertainment, was go to court and watch the trials. So my dad was one of the lawyers, and James Haynes, a prominent Memphis lawyer who was from Ripley originally, was one of the lawyers. And I don't specifically remember, but I remember people telling me about it, that they asked one of the defendants, Yoakum brothers, why didn't you retreat? You know, you're supposed to, why did you go back and get your guns and come back and continue the argument? He said, a Marine never retreats. And
Yeah.
they said the audience broke into cheers and applause.
Wow.
Anyway, they were found not guilty. And that was a interesting time.
You hear of a lot of criminal defense theories, the Twinkie defense, but I've never heard, except for in that story, the Marines don't retreat defense, which seems like in that time frame it would have been a
Well,
pretty
the
good
law
one.
is you're supposed to withdraw
Right.
once your life is no longer in jeopardy. But they went back and got their weapons and came back and settled the score.
And I know the answer to this, but for those who don't, are you married?
Yes.
And tell us.
I'm married to Cindy. She's a South Korean. We've been married about 4 years.
Okay.
And she's the best thing that ever happened to me.
And what about kids? Obviously, I'm your son, and I'm a lawyer.
Blair is the son of, and he may not know it, his grandfather on my mother's side was Blair Pearson. He was a chancellor in Memphis. And my mother met my dad in Judge Colin McKinney's Tennessee Supreme Court Justice from Ripley when he was a practicing lawyer in Ripley. Mother was a secretary there and Dad was a young lawyer there. And they both went to college. Dad went to the University of Alabama. Mom went to the University of Tennessee. The student body in each of those schools was about 500.
Wow.
And they were the first married couple in Ripley who had college degrees.
Wow.
That's what the mother and dad said, so I assume that's right.
And then I have a brother,
Colin.
He's
He's got a master's degree in biology and he works in that field.
And then you have a couple of grandkids I know because they're mine.
Yeah, Ethan and Addie.
Right, a boy and a girl. If Ethan were to come to you outside of my presence and say, Granddaddy Bart, which is what he calls you, should I be a lawyer when I get older? What would you say?
Well, you never asked me that, and I never told you. At one time you wanted to be a chiropractor. At one time you wanted to run a sports bar.
Yeah.
But eventually, I guess you thought, as I did, that you were smarter than your dad. If he could do it, you could do it. And it seemed easy work. We found out differently, of course.
Right.
But yeah, I would say do it if you want it, of course.
Gotcha.
And I've advised a lot of people, I say a lot, 5 or 6 at least, parents whose children are thinking about being a lawyer, but they don't want to because they think it's be stuck in an office and it'd be boring. And I'd say, I haven't looked at a law book in 30 or 40 years. You can do anything. If you're a criminal lawyer, you can learn it. I mean, obviously you look at law books, but you're not stuck in an office. You can do it. Yeah. So it's a wonderful career.
All right. And so in your early career, you mentioned earlier you were working with your father in Ripley. What type of cases would you do then?
Well, I was only with him a year and didn't have many.
Gotcha.
But he died in my arms at a football game in Humboldt, Ripley High School against Humboldt High School. Second half, they kicked off. He stood up, as everybody does, for the kickoff and choked on a Coca-Cola and died within a minute or two. So when he passed away, I got a job with the U.S. Attorney's Office.
And where was that?
In Memphis.
Okay.
When Dad died, Judge Carney, who was on the Court of Appeals, had been his law partner, and he asked me to live in his house, and I did. Stayed with him. And after a few months, one Sunday, we talked about what I would do. Maybe I suggested to him I'd like to be a prosecutor. He got Senator Gore Sr. on the phone right there from Ripley, because small-town politicians, they control that town, and Judge Carney knew everybody, and everybody knew him. So Senator Gore said, okay, he's on, and I got appointed. I had to go through a lengthy FBI check.
And you passed?
Took 3 months, but that's par for the course.
Yeah.
And I was sworn in Memphis in 1966.
And how many assistant U.S. attorneys were there?
There were 4. There was Tom Robinson, the U.S. attorney, Odell Horton, who was later a federal judge, Henry Klein, Bill McTighe, and I.
And tell people some of the really, to me, neat and cool opportunities that you had when you were with the U.S. Attorney's Office?
Well, I was a country boy from Ripley, and all these guys who were there had gotten, in some instances, on merit, and I was just gotten there through Judge Carney, a night law school graduate and not sophisticated at all. But I was the hardest worker there. I got there the first one in the mornings and the last one to leave. Well, Tom Robinson, the U.S. Attorney, was harder working than anybody. He was proud of his job and hard worker, and in many ways difficult, but we all loved him and respected him. In many ways, he was difficult. He could walk through the office, and every secretary there would cry between the time he left his office and got back, because he would, that's overstating it. I don't want his family to hear this. But no, he was a sweet man and a wonderful mentor. Any work ethic I have today, I owe to Mr. Robinson.
Wow, that's saying a lot. And you got to argue in front of the United States Supreme Court as part of
Not in the U.S. Attorney's Office. That was later.
Okay. But what happened of historical significance when you were in the U.S. Attorney's Office?
Well, there were a lot of things I look back on fondly. One, we tried the longest case, 6 weeks, ever in Memphis, according to some sources. And there have probably been a lot more that have lasted longer since then. But there was a bribery case of government officials by cotton classifiers, and we got into, Memphis was the cotton capital of the cotton exchange and all, and that was interesting. Convicted everybody.
Wow.
And there were a lot of funny stories about that case. And my boss had not been selected federal judge. Judge McRae got it, and Mr. Robinson didn't get it. So Robinson would try to push the judge in court. Judge McRae wouldn't hold him in contempt, but all the probation officers would be, ooh, he's gone too far.
Yeah.
But one time there was this juror, and Mr. Robinson said, "Miss So-and-so, am I keeping you awake?" Just crazy stuff.
And then while you were there, Martin Luther King Jr. was shot and killed in Memphis.
He was, and here was something. Being from a small town and a nobody, we had over 100 agents, FBI agents, report to our office. And so the FBI, people don't know this, they don't get a warrant without an approval from the U.S. Attorney if it's something that's not immediate. So in the morning, there'd be all these FBI agents lined up to see the 4 or 5 U.S. Attorneys, assistants. And we'd have to rule on whether or not to authorize a warrant. Oh, here's a funny story. You want to hear this one?
Yeah.
When I was new there, Mr. Robinson said, Mr. Durham said they've arrested some people for hunting on baited fields. And would you go down and do that case? So I went down there, and there were all these leaders of the Memphis civic community who'd been out hunting on baited fields. So bank presidents, Mr. Goldsmith from Goldsmiths, and big department stores, and names I knew. And there were about 20 of them who were defendants. All of them had been arrested. So they came in, and they had all these game wardens and all who had arrested them. And the proof was over, and it wasn't a federal judge. It was a U.S. magistrate who is a federal judge, but it wasn't in the big courtroom. And there were about 20 defendants. They'd just been told, we'll just go over there and pay a fine, listen to them, and be home, be back. So when it was over, the magistrate said, does the government want to be heard? And I think they'd been found guilty or pled guilty. And Lucius Birch, who was the leading attorney in Memphis, so one of the best attorney anybody ever heard, made a beautiful speech short speech, but said all the right things. And in the afterthought, the judge said, Mr. Durham, does the government want to be heard? I said, yes, sir. So I said, Judge, fine, wouldn't do anything to these people. I said, I would suggest like a weekend in jail. He saw Mr. Goldsmith and the president of the college, Memphis State, people like that. The blood was trying. There was a government lawyer arguing to put their family in jail for the weekend. Of course, the judge didn't do it. Didn't do that.
Yeah.
Later, Mr. Durham said, Mr. Durham said, "Did you argue for jail time?" I said, "Yes, sir." He just shook his head. He didn't say anything.
Well, what was it like the morning, or how did you find out about Martin Luther King Jr.'s death?
Oh, I was in a restaurant. It was in the afternoon, and it came out over the news. At Southwestern College Grill, they're eating dinner with a friend, and it came out. And the next day, it was what you could imagine.
Yeah. Well, what led you to leave the U.S. Attorney's office there and start private practice?
Migraine headaches. I started getting such bad headaches that after 3 years, I just resigned. I thought I could go to Washington and change jobs and be on the strike force, the organized crime and racketeering section. So I went up to Washington. Your mom and I drove up there, and I interviewed with the Deputy Attorney General for the Criminal Division of the Justice Department. And Dizzy Dean, who was a famous baseball player, I don't know if you ever heard of him, but people my age all know who he was, was about to be indicted or had been indicted or was mixed up in some sort of gambling deal in Detroit. So I thought it'd be fun to go up there and get on that team. And so I interviewed with a couple of lower level people, and then I saw the Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division. And he said, "How'd you get your job, Mr. Durham?" I said, "Senator Gore recommended me." And he was polite, but I knew it was over. So I drove back to Ripley and never got that job, which was good.
Yeah. So what led you to private practice?
Well, when I was in the U.S. Attorney's office, the State Attorney General, General McCandless came through one day, and my boss was taking him around and introducing him. And General McCandless stuck his head in. I said, "Hi, General." I said, "I'm from Ripley." And Ross Dyer was on the Supreme Court, and he and Ross Dyer were friends, sure. And I said, "General, if I ever leave this job, I'd like a job with you." Well, what's he going to say? "Oh, sure, give me a call. We'd love to have you."
Right.
You know. So 2 or 3 years later, when Nixon succeeded Johnson as president, Judge Carney, if he was alive then, probably. Anyway, I contacted General McCandless, and he said, "Come on up." And I interviewed with him, and I got the job in the State Attorney General's office. I practiced law in Ripley for about a month or two between the U.S. Attorney and the State Attorney General's office. And I went up there from 1968 to 1975. It was a wonderful time.
Is that when you appeared before the U.S. Supreme Court?
Mm-hmm. Because I had federal experience, I ultimately was in charge of federal cases, habeas corpus cases for all of Tennessee. So I went into every federal court. Didn't have any jury trials in those, but I had some other trials. And I had a 3-judge court. In those days, state constitutional laws that were about to be overturned or attempted to be were 3-judge federal courts. So we had a lot of 3-judge federal courts in different places.
And what were the subject matters of the U.S. Supreme Court cases?
Double jeopardy, both of them.
Gotcha.
No, the first one was a lineup case, Wade versus United States. That was a lineup case. And the second one was Robinson versus Neal. That was whether or not the lineup case was to be applied retroactively. And I wrote the briefs and argued them for the Supreme Court. And then when I got out in private practice, I had a third case of Burks versus United States. David Burks was a bank robber, and we won that on double jeopardy.
Was that scary or nerve-wracking as a lawyer to be in that setting? I've never done it and would imagine it's got to be.
Not really. I mean, because I'd worked so hard. I mean, in those days, I was a workaholic. I couldn't do it today just because, it's not because physically I couldn't do it, but I mean, it was just was a different time, and I was prepared. And I went to the U.S. Supreme Court the first time. Avon Williams, Sr. was there. Mr. Williams met me in the lawyer's room, and we talked, and I met a lot of nice people. It was a genteel. Oh, can I tell you about going back and seeing Justice Douglas?
Yeah.
William Neal McKinney, Rube McKinney, was a cousin of mine. He was a man to see in the Browning administration. And Rube's close friend was Judge Douglas, Justice Douglas, and they'd come to Ripley on Open Lake and fish together. And Rube would stay down there. They would stay together in Rube's cabin down there. So I went to Washington, and while I was there, I asked the marshal, I said, I'll tell Justice Douglas, could I see him? I'm a friend. So Justice Douglas had me back in his chambers. And to me, it was just something like you'd go see a friend of your father. Now that I'm older and I realize the historical importance of some of the things, it's really meaningful.
Sure. Well, so after being with the state attorney general's office, that's where you launched into private practice?
Mm-hmm. I left and went on my own. My dad had died, and I had enough money to survive for a while. And I went in with Tom Moon, who was a lawyer, was looking for somebody, and shared office space with him. Tom was doing some business things, and I had a chance to work with him, and I did all the work. Tom had a lot of clients. He'd been in the DA's office, but so I did his work and mine. I didn't have any, and I did all his cases in exchange for free rent and a few dollars here and there that I'd earned. And that went on for a couple of years. And then Tom got into a really good business deal and moved to Thailand and made a fortune there. That's a long story, but it's...
Yeah. Well, tell us, one of the huge things that's happened in your career is you were the first lawyer to advertise in Tennessee. And tell us, if you would, a little bit about the history of that.
Okay. One day I got a call when I'd been in the Attorney General's office. One of my boards had been the medical board. So I got a call from somebody, a referral, that a Dr. Leonard Brooks in Memphis they were trying to take his medical license away for advertising. So I was familiar with advertising at the time because I had somehow a reason I had been involved in it in the Attorney General's office. And the lawyers that the Supreme Court finally came out, the Bates case, that said that lawyers, doctors, pharmacists, chiropractors, everybody could advertise, was a law firm in Phoenix, the Bates firm. So I talked to Bates before that, and they referred Dr. Brooks to me. He sent a letter to Planned Parenthood in Memphis, said, my name is Dr. Leonard Brooks, and I do abortions. And they didn't get him for doing abortions, they got him for sending out a flyer of what he charged, $200 or something like that. So they were trying to take his license away. Really, what they were concerned about was that he was doing abortions. So, and advertising, I guess. So he hired me, and I worked on those cases with him. And I represented him and did a lot of work over the years, 2 or 3 years for him.
And so when the Tennessee Supreme Court allowed advertising.
Yeah, I got ahead of myself. It came out one day in the paper that the U.S. Supreme Court allows advertising, which if their rule, it covers every state. So that day or right after, I contacted the Tennessean and put in a classified ad because I was ready, predicted I think that it was going to be overturned. And they ran my classified ad on the front page of the Tennessean.
Wow.
So, and I copied the Supreme Court ad they approved. Divorces so much, bankruptcies so much, and something else so much. And I copied it with the price there. So I was swamped. And I added 1 lawyer, and a few months later 2 lawyers and 3, and I had 5 or 10 people working for me 2 or 3 lawyers and 6 or 8 staff within a few months. I was not the first in Tennessee. Some lawyer in Memphis beat me. I was the first in Nashville, maybe the second in Tennessee.
Gotcha.
But within 24 hours or so after the opinion.
And back in those days, you sort of got a lot of pushback from the legal community, I would imagine.
People think so, and behind my back probably I did. I tell you, who didn't like it were the guys, my peers. Bassberry and Sims and Dearborn and Ure and all those people, they could care less. The judges could care less. They probably thought it was consumer-oriented and a good thing. So I didn't really get pushback, but I went in court one morning. Here's a story. And the judge was calling the docket for DUIs. And he said, "You have an attorney?" And they call him up. "No, sir." "Well, I see there's some lawyer advertising drunk driving defense for $100. And he kind of sneered about it. Didn't mention me by name, but somebody must have pointed out that's him sitting there in the courtroom. So the judge called me back in his chambers, and he said, "Mr. Durham," said, "I'm sorry." He said, and he apologized. Not that he had really done anything wrong, but he just didn't mean the tone. And several judges, Judge C. Allen High, who was chancellor, one day called me back in his office to say, he had never said anything about it, but just tell me how much he appreciated it. And he asked me, said, "Are you getting a lot of flack?" I said, "No, sir, really, not to my face." So everybody thinks I was courageous, or they say you were, but I wasn't. It's just that's the way it was.
Well, didn't the courts try to change the law, and you had to fight that battle?
They had the Supreme Court ruled of Tennessee put down an order that you couldn't quote prices. No, that you had to quote prices. And the Yellow Pages wouldn't take prices. If you look in the Yellow Pages today, there's never been a price in there. You couldn't say divorce is $200. So I filed suit against it in federal court to determine if that was constitutional. So for some reason, the bar got all exercised that they were being, I named the 5 justices of the Supreme Court as defendants. And so there's a hearing, and their minions were all over there. And Judge Martin took the case and held that was unconstitutional, because my argument was I needed the Yellow Pages to advertise, and I couldn't do it without putting a price in under the Supreme Court rule. So they said that was, so I won that. Got some national publicity.
How was practicing law, if you had to think about the major differences between practicing law then and practicing law now, what would some of those differences be?
The civility and the congeniality and collegiality of the bar, and it comes with size, growth, and then you knew everybody. Now there are thousands of lawyers probably in Middle Tennessee, and it was just as everything. It was a quieter, simpler, easier, more friendly way of life.
But you guys had to try, it seems like, the majority of your cases.
We tried a lot of cases. It was before some bright people discovered mediations. And the mediation is the way to go. The litigation is expensive, and everybody knows it's costly in terms of time and effort and money in every way. And now you can just have people sit around a desk like we are here, and the 2 sides and an independent mediator, and hopefully knock it out.
Were there some Nashville trial judges that stand out to you as far as memories?
I have never known a judge that I didn't admire. That's an honest statement. Even 1 or 2 like Sterling Gray or the other judge, Jim Everett, they were wonderful people. They were really nice, and on the bench they were wonderful. And a lot of people would think our justice system is corrupt or broken or something. That's not true. The DAs were all wonderful. Everybody was just so, and I think they still are today, professional.
Were there any judges that were just characters that stand out to you?
Gail Robinson.
Yeah.
What a wonderful man he was. Yeah, he was. maybe he was bored or maybe he just had a comic streak, but he was a general sessions judge. Like one day, they had something called, for the people who are not lawyers who are watching this, they would have Father's Day. That meant if you didn't pay your child support, there was one day a month or every 2 weeks, so all the fathers who were back in their child support. And he would call Father's Day. And he would sentence them all to jail and have them remain in the courtroom. Then everybody else will leave. He would let them off. Say, all right, I'm going to give you one more chance. Or if they hadn't paid their fines for a DUI or hadn't gone to school for a DUI, he would make them all sit. When they called and they hadn't been to school, he'd say, wait over there, I'm going to deal with you. And he would dismiss court. And he'd say, all right, don't let anything interfere with your education. School for DUI. And he would do something to cut their sentence or let them go. But they got the message. He was a master of human relations, and he was really wonderful.
Well, eventually you switched from doing a general practice to all personal injury.
I was doing divorce, bankruptcy, crimes, and injuries. And I was riding on the elevator in the Parkway Towers down the elevator with Joe Bednarz, who was a lawyer who'd worked for me. And he said, are you still doing DUI and criminal, all that stuff? I said, yeah. He said, don't you know where the money is in personal injury? And I said, well, I guess so, but I'm just trying to get all the business and do all the work I can. So I segued from there and got rid of it. Now all we do is personal injury. You know, in criminal law, you can make most of the charge. I remember one famous musician here, singer, was charged $25,000 for a paternity case. Well, DNA, paternity, it proves it yes or no. And $25,000, but most of the cases, the criminals don't have any money. Divorced people are always unhappy with their lawyer. But you can make $1 million, not that I have, out of one, if a FedEx truck kills a couple of people, the lawyer can make $500,000 or $1 million. So I got into personal injury. And then they started, instead of having to try everything, you could mediate, so you could handle twice as many cases. And it just all worked out, knock on wood.
I remember you saying, you know, because I practiced PI with you, that there was a point where we didn't have a case management system and everything was done with physical files and notes on the file. And
computers, that's the way to go. They just simplify. How did we live without them, you know, before? And now we put cases in our computer and we can throw them up on the screen and have meetings and see everything and the pictures of the clients and the accident reports, just call it up with a click of a button.
When did you first start getting heavy into TV advertising?
For the first 6 or 8 years after 1977, that was the year of the Supreme Court rule, for 2 years, I was the only one advertised in Nashville, believe it or not. And then 1 or 2 people started, and then it started getting more and more. And 2 or 3 years later, I did the first TV. And they ran it on the Perry Mason show, the first TV ad. And
was that the first lawyer TV ad period?
In Nashville.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the lawyer ads were so terrible. They were so just the guy standing in front of books. Well, the lawyers didn't talk. They weren't on screen, and I wasn't on screen for a couple of more years. Then the lawyers appeared on screen, and then the evolution of that was even better. You tell a little story with a lawyer as a voiceover, because let's face it, you've seen lawyers stand in front of books. 99% of them are not actors and make a bad appearance, including me. But it's just evolved. And today the lawyer ads are really, I see every year, they get better and better.
Yeah. Has your philosophy changed over what works and what doesn't over the years?
The philosophy, not so much, just trial and error, what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
What works for us is, there's some thought that showing big dollar amounts where you have them works, and I guess it does, doesn't hurt. We had beautiful people doing interesting things. Now we have you and me talking to people on the street in a casual way. You notice I'm not wearing a suit for this interview, just so we're approachable, easy to talk to, the kind of person. We deal with the people who are not the affluent. This statistic will probably shock Nashville people if they're watching this, that in 21 years of doing this, we've only had 1 or 2 people from the Belmead zip code. There are 2.2 million people in the Nashville demographic area, the ADI, area of dominant influence. And 10% of those is 220,000 people. The lowest, 10% would be the lowest income, the lowest educated people who get all their information from television. Most of it. They don't subscribe to the newspaper. Functional illiteracy is 16% in Middle Tennessee. So they don't, they get make their buying decisions from television. And when they see my ads, and they see others now, there are lots of competitors, they make a buying decision from that. And so my philosophy is it's scary to talk to a lawyer. Usually the lawyers they've known have been the public defenders or the divorce lawyers. They don't hire a corporate lawyer or anything like that. And most people, this is a shocking statistic to viewers, middle-class viewers who are watching this, half the people, I'm guessing, who are married never get divorced. It's too expensive. They just die married, or they live with somebody if they ever get divorced, ever get married. So that's our demographic, and we want to be known. We're marketing as friendly, easy to talk to, not we're some big fancy schmancy big shots, but we're one of you, but we know the law, and we're friendly, and we want to help.
Well, tell people, stepping away from the law a little bit, just about what your passions are. I know several I can think of over the years. Shakespeare, like you said, your dad was into. Flying, I know, but explain a little bit about that.
Well, growing up in Ripley, I like sports.
You're a Cardinals fan, right?
Yeah, in Ripley, I can talk for hours. We got 2 or 3 more hours about growing up in a small town. Ripley's on the square, and in the summer you could walk all the way around the square and not miss a pitch of a Cardinal game because all the doors were open, no air conditioning. The radios were on, and my dad and mother took me to once a year. My dad was the attorney for the Illinois Central Railroad, and we got free passes. So we'd ride up on a sleeper, get on the train to Ripley at sundown, wake up in Chicago the next morning, and we always went when the Cardinals were playing the Cubs, and we'd see Saturday and Sundays and come back Sunday night. My dad never took a vacation. His whole life, he was 75 before he ever took a trip. And so that was our week. And Mom was a fan. Everybody was a fan. It was a great time. I didn't appreciate it. I did not appreciate it. I just took it all for granted.
Right.
That's the way life was.
What about some of your other passions?
Well, I got into cars because of you.
Yeah.
And you were interested in Ferraris, and I had a good chance to buy a Ferrari once, and we started driving Ferraris.
Yeah, that was a blast. We'd rent out tracks with other car enthusiasts. Flying.
Yeah, I became a pilot. You know how much I paid an hour, including gas, to rent an airplane when I was at Florida State?
No.
$3 an hour for a Ronca Champion. If I wanted to go fancy, I'd get an air coupe. That was $4.50 an hour. And so I learned to fly at FSU. I was licensed in 1964, and they used to give you a paper certificate, and I'd be on Southwest or somewhere, and I'd show the pilot my license with date of issue 1964. They said, wow, I didn't even know those. But that was fun.
And scuba diving.
Yeah,
we
I got
all
into
did
that
as a
because
family.
of your brother Colin.
Yeah.
He was taking scuba diving at Auburn, so you and he did that.
Yep. Traveling.
Yeah.
What were some of your favorite travel memories?
Well, I started going to a fitness spa, a fitness resort or camp really, in Utah, and I'd spend a lot of time out there. And then you came out, when you went in the Marine Corps, you came out and got in shape there. You were in shape when you got there. You were in more shape when we left. Fitness, and that was it.
What about now?
Now?
Yeah.
About fitness? Yeah.
Well, just about hobbies in general.
Well, I'm 81 now,
Yeah.
so I try to stay fit, and I go to the gym every day and walk and do everything. And my wife goes with me, and she's fit.
I've always loved it. I guess maybe as the genesis of Shakespeare, you've always been into art films, and that's something that we've been able to share together throughout the years, is going to the Belcourt.
Belcourt's a great treasure.
Yeah, Shakespeare festivals.
Mm-hmm.
How was it your dad that got you into that Shakespeare? And
No, I'll tell you how I got into it. I bought some tapes, and just cassettes, and I started listening to Hamlet or something, and I was driving back and forth to East Tennessee for a case, and listening to the Cadman tapes, and they were really good, and it was every word unabridged, done by the BBC or somebody, and I thought, this is really good. I had it in college, but everybody's heard Hamlet, but it all came alive, and ultimately Shakespeare wrote 37 plays, and I got familiar with about 20 of them, 15 or 20 of them.
are there any, as you said here today, are there any projects that you're contemplating, or?
I wanted to write a memoir, and I had a writer sit down with me for a period of time, and we talked about it, and then I thought, I don't know if I want to do that. Now I'm sort of getting the bug to do it again. But it wouldn't be, you know why I'm one of the best speakers at a lawyer's conference?
Why is that?
Because I don't brag on myself. You, as a lawyer, you've gone to them, and the people who are watching this are many of them lawyers. Every time you go to a seminar, the lawyer tells you what it pounds his chest, and it's really off-putting. I'm talking about the famous. You go, and there's some guy you've admired, celebrity lawyer.
Johnny Cochran was one of mine.
Yeah, all he can talk about is the cases he won, how stupid the DAs were, and how smart he was. Well, the few that I've done, I'll talk about my mistakes and things I've messed up, and that would be my book would be about.
And if you were a law school professor or taught an adjunct law school class, and you could pick the topic, or what would you teach? What would your class be?
The topic to teach to
the
students.
subject matter.
Subject matter? You mean like wills or?
No, I've always heard you say to me, I guess I was trying to elicit the answer, was I'd teach a class about all the things they don't teach you in law school.
Yeah, well, there's a reason, Blair, why they don't teach you that. Like how to deal with clients and how to handle angry clients, and there's things you learn by experience.
And if a young lawyer's listening to this, any words of wisdom after you've practiced now more than 50 years?
51 years now.
What would you tell a young lawyer starting today listening to your oral history
I wouldn't know what to tell them now except just the usual bromides, work hard, do this and that. Judge Gray, that I tell you about, my dad worked under, studied under, he was a chancellor in Brownsville, and he used to say, if you be good to the law will be good to you. And he was a wonderful man. But I think if you work hard and it's a passion for you, you like what you do. By that I mean, when I worked for a short time in my dad's bank, I was filing checks all the time. That's all I did. In the morning I'd come in and just file checks. I got to where I liked it. So if you really work hard studying or in law or anything else, chances are you'll like it. You know, if you dug ditches all day, you might find that you're kind of like moving dirt from one part of the shovel to another. And if you work hard and study, you'll be a success. If you're good to the law will be good to you. And I don't buy this, you can't make it today, it's stupid, and you don't have a chance, it's stacked against your corporate. No, you can still make it.
Anything else you want to add?
No, apologize for going so long.
Great.